I'd been to a NRCS event down in Billings, and we talked about no-till, and I just said, Dad, we're going to do it, and that's what we did.
Well, I was looking at buying a disc ripper, and I got to visiting with some neighbors, and they were dabbling in this no-till, and I thought, heck, I'm gonna try no-till before I buy a disc ripper, and I'm glad I did that. So now I saved a bunch of money and never bought a disc ripper.
We started with no-till on dry land, quite a while ago, I guess. My grandfather was actually, no-tilled some in the 80s on certain pieces of ground that kind of responded better to it. We thought, well, we can take that down to the irrigated and quit spending so much money on diesel and tractor hours.
That is one of the main reasons why no-till beets started coming around in this area. I can't remember what year it was, if it was 14 or 15. We had some extreme wind and a lot of soil moved. I had beet fields that were in ground similar to this that really mellowed out, got sugary, and you could just see those beets holding on for dear life.
You never see it blowing across the highway anymore, so that's a good thing. Well, the benefits that I see from reduced or zero tillage, I guess, is a lot of it's cost savings. In this business, sometimes the only money to be made is the money you didn't spend. And I think the fact that we can raise as good or better of crops while spending less money is important.
Because my neighbors are out plowing today and I'm not. There's one farm down, I think they have 3 tractors in one field. So 10 gallons an hour per tractor, at $2.50 a gallon. Probably the $15 to $20 an hour per the person in the tractor. Wear and tear, that's all money that I'm not spending today. I get just as good or better yield than I ever have, and I'm not spending any money to get that.
We've been in a steady uptrend on both yield and sugar and tonnage for quite a while here.
So I just roughly figure I'm probably saving $150 an acre by not doing any tillage. The yield as far as tonnage it was similar, but the sugar was definitely better in the no-till ground.
So when you stop disturbing the soil, a lot of good things start to happen. You actually allow the soil to function as it's meant to.
The ground is so much more forgiving now too. Like, we really don't ever have much trouble with crusting, for the beets and other seeds that are hard to come up. And there's protection against the wind, so we don't have, beets blowing out.
But I have noticed the ground, it's firmer in the spring. It seems like the equipment stays up on the ground really nice. And digging beets in the fall, when it's wet, the trucks don't sink. They stay up really nice.
It seems like we're getting a lot more mineralization of nitrogen in the ground. It's not uncommon for me to have between 90 and 120 units of nitrogen available after a crop. We seem to be getting a lot more earthworms. And we went to one of the fields that I had beets in. My kids really like worms. So I dug up a shovelful and handed it to them and told them to pick all the worms out. And they had handfuls. In one shovelful, I bet we pulled out 40, 50 earthworms.
So yeah, this is excellent structure. You can see there's an earthworm right there. Best soil engineers on the planet. Evidence of earthworms are currently active because we haven't destroyed their habitat. So they're able to thrive and work for Kevin in his beet field out here. You see there's excellent structure, great soil aggregation. It's very crumbly. There's no signs of a compaction layer. The aggregation is good, down deeper right here. You want it to crumble like chocolate cake, just like that. And that structure's all built by microbes. It's never built by tillage. Tillage only makes it go backwards.
I always thought no-till would have the biggest problems in a wet year, but that turned to be exactly the opposite. This year there's a lot of problems with conventional tillage out there, flooding and washing, and we hardly had any problems. 3 or 4 days later, you'd never have known it. We got 6 inches in 1 hour. A few puddles, but we kept a lot of that water. Further up the road, it was washing across the road and up to the running boards on the pickup and coming out of the field. And the no-till makes it very resilient towards extreme weather events. And the no-till beets, you can tell the corners. They don't, even when it was hot, they didn't lay down. The leaves didn't sunburn. Fields in the area that were conventional, the leaves started to sunburn last week. They needed water last week. and they got just as much rain or more rain than we did. There's a big difference there.
If you want water infiltration, you got to have soil structure. And so fields that have that good structure after really heavy rain, they don't pond. Water goes into the soil. Doesn't matter what the rain gauge says. It matters what actually went into the soil.
We really thought irrigation was going to be our biggest issue, and I still think everybody thinks that. Oh, we'll never be able, if we got one piece of straw out there in the whole field, the water won't make it to the end, and that's the farthest thing from the truth. But when we started doing it and you could irrigate every 14 days or every 21 days rather than every 7, a lot easier to irrigate. I just think all the water holding capacity, the barley straw and the corn stalks, things like that, it shades the ground. It slows up that water and lets it soak in.
Now that I've done this this is my 3rd year, the irrigation is the least of my worries. It irrigates nice. I don't have any trouble with getting the water through. The biggest challenge to me is just getting it planted the way it needs to be. Well, this drill is just set up with, it's got 3 adjustments for down pressure, and that's all I use. I never had to add anything to the drill, and that seemed to do the trick. These are the Schlegel closing wheels, and they actually work really well. They close the row and they kind of leave little clods, so it helps a lot with crusting. But the problem I'm having when I plant into the real heavy soils, when it's wet into the barley stubble, is there's so much surface here that they're trying to push and close the ground. They got to move a lot of ground, and I can't get it to close the V up. So I need to address that problem. And there's probably some closing wheels out there that would work better in that situation than these.
Put liquid fertilizer in furrow. The first planters we used had spring downforce for the row units. I've got one with air pressure downforce now. You have to kind of check it here and there. If you've got a sandy field or a real clay one, I mean, it's going to vary a little bit, and it makes a difference even on how much liquid fertilizer I have in my tanks. I mean, on harder ground, I never let my tanks go below 1/4, so I've got enough weight to hold the planter down so the row units aren't coming out of the ground.
My only thing is just, you don't need a big fancy planter. Don't let that hold you back. I'm using, I guess, old equipment and getting more out of it. It's paid for itself years ago, and now it's just working for free. Other than I probably put a new set of discs on every 4 or 5 years now. And the first couple years that you start no-tilling, your ground will be harder. Not terrible hard, but it's still building that structure. I don't know. The bugs aren't there, something isn't there, but by the 3rd year, it's very mellow. You won't wear out a set of discs. Your new discs are thick, and yeah, they're sharp, but they're still thick. So when you're trying to get it into the ground, that first year, it's not like a razor blade, it's more like an axe. And so it's harder to kind of get those brand new blades in the ground. But if you get a couple years wear on them, you get them thinned down a little bit. They may not be sharp, but they go in a little better. We've had to, on my insecticide boxes on the back of the planter, I'll put a stack of Quikrete concrete mix in each one of them if we need a little bit more weight. I have some of the Schlegel wheels, and then I have some of the John Deere wheels. I can never tell the difference between the Schlegels and the regular John Deere wheels that's on it, the solid rubber. There are times when I think in wet spots that the Schlegels might work a little bit better, but I think that when I'm planting them, but you come back, 2 weeks later and everything came up.
There's a lot of people that like just the rubber closing wheels. I don't think that does anything for you for your sidewall compaction. You're just adding pressure, and I don't want pressure. You try to keep trucks out of the field, especially like in beet harvest where you're typically wet. Now we have 2 carts that we run. They stay on the end, you load them out. Even if you do end up with some hairpinning, a lot of those seeds are gonna still germinate because there's that much more moisture available in the ground at seeding time. Hairpinning can be an issue on it, but it's less than what a guy thinks. So I think we see less weed pressure because you have the residue there to suppress the weeds. Having a diverse rotation and changing up your chemistries is super important. but I raise 14 different crops and I have 5 years between beets.
All right, that stubble's about a foot tall, and it makes it easier for irrigation and easier for planting that it's vertical like that. And he's not bailing it off. What the straw is worth in the market is not nearly what it's worth here.
There's probably some issue with maybe things take off a little slower on the no-till ground, but I think they catch up quite a bit in July when it's 90 and 100 degrees out. You know, the soil doesn't get 90 or 100 degrees, it stays 60. I mean, if you walk out there and sort through the fodder and you've got 65-degree soil and the beets keep growing, you know, you'll really see it during the growing season. The leaves don't lay down like they do a lot in tilled ground.
One of the struggles is that early season vigor. You know, it's hard to watch those fields look ugly and be comfortable that they're gonna catch up. It'd be nice if we could figure out a way to increase that. I'm sure, you know, by cutting lower, removing residue and stuff like that, that would help. But then you're giving up something on the back end. And we have a lot more season where it's hot than we do where it's cool. So I don't feel like that's a good way to compromise.
The microbes, the earthworms, they're all working for you to provide everything the crop needs. You get cooler soil, so there's less evaporation. You know, like
I guess I'd say try it. You know, you don't have to dive in and do 100% of your crop in year one. If you have a field that you think is more suited for it, try that field and just see what you think. Don't feel like you need to go all in on anything. You know, work your way into things.
My biggest advice is do a little bit the first year, you know, maybe one field. And when you plant, you got to have a lot of patience, because that's where I struggled and I thought was the hardest part of it all. If you just keep with it, it'll work out for you. Like I said, I've only done it 2 years and I've had great success with it.